Well, I'm Joe Hanreddy, and I am the artistic director of the Milwaukee Repertory Theater, where I've been for 17 years. And in that time, I've directed many plays. The production of Pride and Prejudice premiered at our theater, at the Milwaukee Repertory Theater, last spring. I came across Jane Austen novels some years ago when I was directing a play that's set in the same period. It's a play by Tom Stoppard called Arcadia. And I wanted to know a bit about the manners and the mores of the Regency period. So as part of my research, I set about reading all of Jane Austen's novels. That play, half of it is set in the modern day, and there was a lot of scientific information about thermodynamics, etc. So I left that for the actors to decide and said, well, you teach me all about thermodynamics, but I'll work on the 18th century period. And I was fascinated with the books. They were just terrific for my research, and as part of that, in the back of my head, I thought, well, these are very theatrical. Someday I'd love to work on one of these. Well, my partner on this project was Jim Sullivan, who is now the artistic director of the Pearl Theater in New York. And Jim and I were not in the same town other than for 3 days that we had a little concentrated work period. Jim was at the Utah Shakespeare Festival, and I was up in a cabin in northern Wisconsin for most of the writing. So we would simply divide up between us what sections of the books that we would like to work on. Because Jim was going to direct the play, he took initially a lot of the large ball scenes, which had a heavily populated stage, and he would work on those. And I would work on maybe an overview structurally and do a lot of outlining, and then I would write a lot of the two-person scenes or three-person scenes or family scenes. And then we would trade work, and we would freely write over what the other person wrote and just keep trading it back and forth until we were both satisfied with it. Well, it's a very large book, and there are a lot of complications to the plot and a lot of stories and much financial shenanigans which have very complicated solutions and are very much a period of the time. So we needed to do a lot of simplification of the plot. A lot of outlining, a lot of essential story points, and a lot of writing and a lot of cutting afterwards, so that we could just get to the essence of the character. What drives all of Jane Austen's stories are money and love. She said one time, I write only about money and love, what else is there? And that was the essential. What affected Mr. Darcy and what affected Elizabeth Bennet, and that was our spine for the play. And we tried to introduce only as much complications as would provide conflict for the story. Well, one of the things I've come away from this process with is just realizing how contemporary a lot of the ideas that are in Jane Austen are and how timely they are, the relationship between love and money. And Jane Austen was writing about the class structure in England, which mostly included the gentry class. And it was a very wide range of economics in that class, from the very highest level of it, which is Mr. Darcy, who was just on the verge of being aristocracy, to some of the people who had a sense of income that was always precarious and was totally dependent on whatever romance, whatever love relationships. So the piece in that sense became a parody of the marriage market in 18th century. But coming away from it, I realized that so many of these considerations enter into all love relationships at one level or another. And I think that gentry class in many ways is very much the audience that we have coming to see our plays, who have great ranges of economic means, but they all have some means. And that the book in some ways really strikes at home, and there's many people who recognize part of their own romantic past in seeing the plays. And I also feel like the initial title of Pride and Prejudice was First Impressions. And one of the things that I love is identifying with what our first impressions of somebody are, and then as we get to know them, we find out that there's a whole other set of circumstances that we're unaware of that are driving their behavior. And so we come to this initial impression of them, which can be completely wrong, and unlearning that initial impulse is something that is part of the driving force of the play, and it's something that I think almost anybody can identify with.